Ask you a question because I loved your New York Times blockbuster, best-selling, profound novel, The Emperor of Gladness. And when I opened up the first page to chapter 1 and I read the first sentence, I thought if I ever meet Ocean, I want to ask you about what this means. And the sentence is, the hardest thing in the world is to live only once. What does that mean?
You have to make it count. What does it mean to live and owe something to the people you love? Your obligation to them, to your community, and to live with that kind of care. Because the other side of that is YOLO. You only live once, enjoy it, smash it all, and look where it's gotten us. Ecological despair, corporate greed, plundering our environment, our planet, just for profit. That's a lot of YOLO. Another side of YOLO is that, well, if you only live once, how do you live in a generative way? How do you live with care and consideration with the meditative practice you just did? You don't have to be a monk and sit there and go om and do chanting. You can actually do it while listening to someone talk, right?
I want to unpack this even deeper. The hardest thing in the world is to live only once. And you said, to you, that means you have to make it count. And what I would love to hear you talk a little bit about, because I've never asked anybody this question, but as a professor, I bet you are witness front and center to this sense of pressure and urgency that is not only inside your students, but it is 1000% inside every character in your book.
Yeah.
But this pressure that I think is almost universal to make something of yourself.
Yeah.
To make your life count.
Yeah.
And for somebody who's listening right now who heard you say, oh, well, you have to make it count. And they now feel like, but I'm not Ocean. Like I'm stagnant. I'm working in this restaurant job. I didn't expect I would be here. It doesn't feel like it's counting at all.
Yeah.
What would you say to the person that's in that space? Because I think the pressure you feel to want it to count is a really good sign.
Yeah.
Of this sense inside you.
Yeah.
That there is something more for you. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think for me, there's two, there's what society counts. And often because we don't know any better, we're told that it's almost like a download. Society downloads the set of values into us. And then we say, well, I need to get a good job. I need to get out of here. Right. And that's why, like, this novel, there's no escape plot. These are working poor people. They remain so, but it doesn't mean that their lives are doomed. I reject this idea that a story about down and out poor people is only valuable if they can escape it. Because there's plenty of films, plenty of novels about that. And I think as Americans, we fetishize rescue. I think there are more Americans rescued in American films than actual Americans. Right? Like, and yeah, it feels good to watch that movie. Oh gosh, they rose out of it. And then there's the other part. There's an alternative count, which is your obligation to yourself and your life and your community, regardless of what that means in the CV, in the social standards and what have you. And I think what I learned working in fast food and the tobacco farms growing up, and what I wrote about, is that in those spaces, there's something really, really humbling and powerful, is that if you walk into NYU, where I now work, if you walk into a doctor's office, a dentist's office, a law office, everybody who's there worked and wanted to be there. They might not like their job, fine, but they all deliberately work to get there. But the folks in the fast food restaurant, they never want to be there. That's not their final goal. they are deferring something else, right? What's so humbling and powerful about that is that everybody you see, you realize there's another dream. And when you work enough hours, it becomes really, it looms large, and you start to really want to find ways to find out that dream. You have these kind of probing conversations. What do you do after? What do you do before this? What are you doing after this? You do a night class? All of a sudden, these spaces open up in these restaurants and corporations that were not meant to be there. They're kind of subversive utterances. And so to me, I think what I mean by the hardest thing in the world is to live only once, is to live according to your values, again, dignity, and what you owe to yourself, your family, and your community, however that means to you, and wrestling yourself away from the standards of ultimate success or what have you. Like I am lucky to be a successful author and a professor, but I live in New England still because 9 of my family members still live there. They're all refugees. They came with me. I don't have enough generational wealth to liberate them from the working poor. So my family still work at Amazon warehouses, nail salons. And I'm there. I've had job offers in lovely places, Paris, Germany. I said, as soon as they come in, I said, there's no way. Because I got to take my aunt to her doctor's appointment. I got to do her taxes. I have to help my cousin go into a psych ward once in a while, right? So, and that's not a burden to me. And I want to make that clear. That's a privilege. I get to. It's a privilege to be able to sacrifice. I get to help them. Because when I was growing up, you needed your tooth extracted, chaos. You had to call a loan shark. We had to call a local Vietnamese grocery store to borrow money from God knows who. Don't ask, don't tell, right? And just to get like little things done. So it was like the end of the world when those things happen. And now every emergency my family has, I can take care of. And I'm proud of that. And to me, if that's what I'm doing with my one life that I'm given, then I'm really, really proud of that. And I think having the courage to break away from the social expectations of count and then realigning what counts for you. It's hard work, though. It took me 20 years. And this is still new to me. This is a new feeling, right? I don't want folks to have this understanding that I just I've always had this. I'm developing it as we speak.
What I'd love to have you do is if you could speak directly to the person who's really resonating, because I know so many people will, and maybe they're in the job and they thought they'd only work at the restaurant for 2 or 3 years. And they're just getting by. And they're starting to feel that dream of a different life slipping away. What do you want them to know?
I think for me, you have a myth of yourself. And, the myth for myself was to be a business person because that's just what I thought where money was. So when I was 15, I thought I was working in a tobacco farm for cash. It was no Uncle Sam, no taxation, under the table, $9.50 an hour, way better than minimum wage, which is $7.15. And it was so interesting because we lived in HUD housing, Section 8, and my mother sat me down one day and said, "Son, I crunched the numbers, and you need to get a job. You're about to be 16, but you got to just work at McDonald's." So can you imagine, what happened to American dream, upward mobility, do what you want, follow your destiny, right? I'm like, what? Excuse me? And she's like, no, you can't even be the manager. You need to just be minimum wage because if you make any more, we'll be kicked out. And we won't be able to afford an apartment on the open market. So upward mobility could render you homeless. And then it clicked. I said, oh, no wonder every other teenager in my neighborhood is a drug dealer. Because if you're a child to a single mom, and there were daughters and sons in that too. If you're a child to a single mother and you want to help her out to get a job, if you get too much money, you're going to lose your housing. So what are you going to do? Sell weed on the side, get cash, put it on the mattress. Mom pays the light bill with her checks. You take her to the grocery store. Hmm. And I have seen folks do that. And I don't condone drug dealing. I've seen folks do that and move out and move on and stop that and have relatively economically successful lives. I've seen folks do that and end up in jail and die. So it's just a complete crapshoot, and so I went into the farm, as a way to help my mother. But I had this myth that I would go out and be the one who has a degree. I was going to study international marketing and really be the superhero of my family. And then I got to the school in New York to study, and I studied for just 4 weeks before I dropped out. And all that myth of who I am to myself crumbled. And I often say this, and not in any tongue-in-cheek way. I said, I became a writer out of failure. And more so, I became a writer out of shame. I could have went home to my mom and said, Mom, I tried, I can't do it. I'm not cut out to go to Chase, JP Morgan, like all my colleagues are with their suits. I don't have a suit. We have one suit. It's called a funeral suit. That's all I had. I didn't even bring it. I was optimistic going to New York. I said, I'm not going to bring my funeral suit. I went to enough funerals. So that's all I had, and I didn't even conceive that you had to wear a suit for an internship. So I was so out of place that I felt like a fool. And I didn't have the wisdom I had now. I couldn't show up to that place and just see how much of an outsider I was. So I dropped out and I roamed the streets, couch surfing, doing open mics. And someone would say, why don't you just go home? And if I went home, my mom would say, sit on down. I save you a seat at the nail salon. Pick up the filer. Let's get to work. But I didn't do that because I was too ashamed to go to her and say, I failed you. I'm the only one that knows English. I'm the only one that can read. I'm the only one that could potentially have a college degree. And I'm going to come back empty-handed. I could not live with myself. So I stayed in the city. I stayed in Penn Station for 2 weeks trying to figure things out.
Meaning you actually slept in Penn Station?
Penn Station, yeah. Right under Madison Square Garden. It was the warmest place. But Penn Station is open 24 hours, and you can stay near the Long Island Railroad. And, eventually I became a student at Brooklyn College, and I pursued a degree in literature. But it was because I was too ashamed. I would prefer to be homeless than go home and say, Ma, all your dreams. Because I knew, even though she said, don't worry about it, I knew she had dreams for me. I couldn't face her and say, all that is over. So shame is a powerful thing. If you can transform your shame into action and then motivation, it could be the foundation for you to alter your sense of self.
What would you say to a student that came to your office hours? And, Professor Vuong, I am so full of shame. I do not belong here. I have really screwed up. And the shame is not motivating them in a positive direction. It is drilling them into a hole.
Yeah.
So if you had a student sitting in your office hours who was really pummeling themselves with shame, what would you say to them?
Every semester.
Every semester this happens?
Oh my goodness, especially in the creative arts. We have students who come from all over the world. Some of the most exciting work in Anglophonic literature right now is coming out of India and Nigeria. And I have a lot of students from India and Nigeria. And boy, imposter syndrome runs very, very deep. And here they are in NYU. They're following their dreams. Meanwhile, these are the students, the most successful ones. They're like ticking the boxes of their dreams. They're not dropping out. That nothing has gone awry, and they still feel this. And I relate to that immensely. So for me, I told them, I said, look, I share the same shame and doubt that you do. But you believe, I have a sense that you believe that there is a kind of comfort and agreeability to being in the center of power, right? In the institution. That's what normal people have. They don't feel like they're imposters. They feel like they belong here, that they should be here. But I tell them, I said, the day that I feel that I belong in institutional power is the day my creativity dies. I never want to feel comfortable here. And we turn that into a pathology. We say, you are ill, you have a syndrome. But I refuse to believe that. To me, it's an immune system. I have imposter immune system.
What does that mean, imposter immune system?
It means that when I'm in the center, I don't believe that being in the center alone is anything valuable or dignified. You have to still have conduct. You still have to have behavior and ethics. And also that when you realize, you go into these spaces and you realize, actually, what I learned back there in my hometown that I thought I was escaping from was much more useful for me than what I'm seeing here. That this charade, right, of power and belonging is truly a hallucination. There's people who feel comfortable here because they have been given this path. Their parents gave them this path. Their grandparents gave them this path, that they were following a trajectory that was carved for them. So of course they feel like they belong. But do you really want that? Do you want that path for yourself? Because that's also the denial of your own creativity. You need that kind of friction, that vigilance.
Well, I think what you're getting at is applicable to anybody.
Yeah.
Because let's say you get a divorce and now you're single and your friend group disappears. And as you start to insert yourself into other social groups or you see old friends, you will feel that separateness and you will feel that sense of, I don't belong here. And if I listen very closely, what you're saying is that separateness and that friction is a very important and necessary ingredient to you being able to do the work to grow into or to be the person you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
Whether it's the friendships you've outgrown or the places that you are never going to quite feel like you belong in, or the work you need to do to build the skills so that you don't even think about it anymore because you now have the skills to belong.
Yeah.
And so I think it's applicable to all of us.